Hello, and welcome to the 60 for 30 project. My name's Xander Miller with Kenosha Public Library. I'm sitting here with Alana Carmichael. Alana, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. How are you?
I am doing well today, though it's a little hotter than I would like.
Yes.
We're going to work it and hope the AC holds up. So, let's go ahead and get going. So, Alana, what part of the area or neighborhood of Kenosha are you from?
I'm from Leona's. Originally we were in Whitecaps, but we moved a few times before we finally settled. It's on the west side.
Okay. Okay. You said north side, south side, west side, though. That's nice. Okay. And so, what do you think is Kenosha's culture, or what have you experienced as Kenosha's culture?
I think depending on where you are, like in the city, it varies, I do prefer the uptown, downtown area because I feel like that's where a lot of the people that I know are, but also that's where a lot of the bigger part of the culture lies. I feel like among the African American, Black and brown communities, at least for me, obviously, I can resonate a lot with it. I think like around the schools too, around like the high schools, there's a lot of just like teen culture like in itself, but that also varies on what school you go to. But mostly like the downtown Lincoln Park area, that's where I do a lot of not charity work, but volunteer work and stuff like that. And I really, really do like being around the people there in the neighborhood. They're just always so full of life, and they're always so welcoming, and they are always so up to have a conversation with you. So I think that's where it is.
So, like in that area, kind of more specifically, it's a friendly atmosphere, is what you're saying. What else about the culture, kind of that uptown Lincoln Park area, do you what do you experience, I suppose?
It's a lot of just like learning. I mean, I have been very sheltered my entire, not like to. I've experienced poverty before we moved here, and I experienced, racism and stuff like that, but, like, you meet people who have a million walks of life, and you meet everybody who's just coming in and out of the area, and it's always so educational, it's always so informational, and it's, like, I think the people there are just so, what's the word? They're so charismatic, so they're just so welcoming. I think that's the biggest part. They just are very, very welcoming.
Mm-hmm. So people are welcoming, though you said you're on the west side, right?
Yes.
So that's not the same area.
No.
So what would you say is the west side like?
Well, it's mostly subdivisions, so we don't there's not really much intermingling between subdivisions. Obviously, we have friends in the subdivision I live in, but I don't have any of my friends in my subdivision, so a lot of the hanging out and stuff happens by the lake, or it happens, in Target or whatever, and we're just walking around. I don't think there really is much culture on the west side, more as there's just smaller communities, and I think it just depends on who you know, because some of them are just a little bit more exclusive, but it's all right.
Okay. So with that said, it's a bit more exclusive, not as, I'd say, does tight-knit sound like a word that describes that? Or
not exactly tight-knit. I'd say more I don't want to sound mean, but inaccessible almost, because it's kind of out of the way of everything else. People often look at it the other way around, we have, the stores, and we have all the other stuff, but a lot of the rest of what's happening happens past Green Bay. And although I the neighborhoods are nice and they're quiet, a lot of just the activity and a lot of the neighborhood feel happens not on the west side.
So how has that affected you growing up?
Well, I moved here when I was 12, so I skipped the whole elementary school part. But, middle school, high school, and it wasn't so much of an issue before COVID, because, you're in school, you're with all your friends. Outside of school, you have practice and, stuff you can do. But, when you're stuck in the house and all you have are your neighbors and you don't know any of your neighbors that well, it can be a little bit, like isolating, but it's not so bad. You know what I mean? It's not as, like, there are more positives, I'd say.
Yeah, that's interesting. You bring up COVID and kind of isolation, but you've also, the uptown area is kind of where you found, I guess, more community for you. How has COVID affected going down and going into the uptown area or moving about the city? How has that affected you?
It's been pretty hard to, like, move around the city, especially when it first kind of started. I didn't have my license, so obviously, like, I was getting down there either by, like, my parents or, like, my friends or my friends' parents. And then when I got my license, it was a lot easier to move around. But, like, before then, my parents weren't really letting us out of the house. I stopped working, so, like, just all of it kind of just was on standstill. I didn't see a lot of the people that I'd met in, like, almost a year. Some people I hadn't seen in a year. And then when everything happened with George Floyd and stuff like that, we started moving around a little bit more. But even still, we weren't allowed, we had face masks and stuff like that. So there's still, like, a barrier, I feel like, between everybody. But, like, especially people you don't live around, it's harder to like, I guess, keep up when you don't see each other as often.
Yeah, but you did say, things happened with George Floyd that, some of that you got together more. Is that correct?
Yeah.
How did you do that? Could you talk about that more?
Yeah. Well, when we found out what happened, we found out how George Floyd was murdered. I didn't really know what to do because there was a lot of anger going on, specifically in Minneapolis where it happened, and so a lot of the activity was going on over there, and everybody over here was kind of trying to figure out what to do, and everybody just wanted to help or to just do something to create, whether that's noise or change or just something to get people to notice, like, okay, this is still happening and it's bad. Mm-hmm. And so me and a few of my friends, we founded Equiteens, and we hosted our first protest on Juneteenth. I think a little bit more than a month, or a little bit less than a month after the George Floyd was murdered. And a lot of the people who I'd met in the uptown, downtown area, they were just so ready to help me, so ready to jump in and volunteer where they could. So we got a lot of help from both Brandon and a lot of our friends from the uptown area. Yeah,
and at that time, we had COVID. Was that like the first time after a long time that you got to see some of your friends was to get together to protest?
Yes, actually, we had a very long conversation about this because all Black children are exposed to some form of racism, prejudice by the time they're like 7. Mm-hmm. So the fact that, we're out here doing this at 16, it wasn't shocking, it was just more sad. And so we had lots of conversations about how, like, oh, we're so young, we shouldn't be doing this. But at the same time, we all are very passionate about it. So it wasn't something that we were dreading. It was just something that we knew we just shouldn't be doing because it just shouldn't exist. But, racism has always existed. So it's something that we've kind of struggled with.
So, and you said it was founded Equiteens. How would you say, youth's culture is in Kenosha growing up? Because, to found an organization, to organize a protest, there has to be, it sounds like there has to be some level of a lot of youth want to get involved in stuff. So how would you say youth's culture here is in Kenosha?
I say everybody does like to get involved with things they care about. I think people they don't realize how much teenagers actually care about things other than themselves. So it was really nice to see, people I hadn't spoken to since we got out of school, and also like the people that I've met downtown even after the protest, just kind of like come together under one big cause and just really work for it. But also, we have like a lot of the teenagers who didn't do anything, and it was like a really noticeable like line where like, oh, kids who aren't saying anything, kids who are, out there protesting. And it did cause, I think, like a lot of drama between not only schools but friend groups and, peers, and just like honestly, like the youth in general, everybody had differing opinions, and everybody just had differing, like, I guess, ways that they wanted to attack like certain problems. And with all the time that we had and all the space we had, it's like everybody was trying to do as much as they could as fast as they could, and it did get a little bit messy. And but I do think that since then we've kind of come together a little bit more, and with school and all that stuff starting, I hope that it is not as dramatic as it was in the summer, but I can only wait and see.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, how did it seem like the Kenosha community reacted to your group? Because having teens organize something is something that's for like everyone in the community as well. That seems very different than what we're used to seeing when groups organizing. So how did kind of the greater, even older Kenosha community react to you all organizing this?
We got a lot of support. I think people who supported us were more inclined to, tell us that they support us, more than people who weren't,
Mm-hmm.
like who didn't support us, were inclined to say like they didn't. And I'd say like we didn't get as much confrontation as I thought I would. I truly did not. I thought it would be more like, loud. I thought people would be angry. I thought, all that type of stuff. But we did get lots of opposition from, I'd say, some younger kids and some younger people who like we didn't even know. But I think the older community was very, very helpful. They were very supportive, and they volunteered a lot of their time to help us with a lot of stuff. So
that's awesome. That's good to hear. You were
Yeah.
supported by a lot of at the time, because you were teens at the time. A lot of adults supporting you all getting your work done. That's great.
Yeah.
So, what would you like to see in Kenosha moving forward? Because we've had we were just talking about George Floyd, and then 2 months after the Juneteenth festival, 2 months and a few weeks, we had Jacob Blake. And what else? What are you looking forward to, or what have you done moving forward as part of that group?
Our main focus had always been education reform and police reform. It's kind of hard to do when you're out of school and also like very young because people, like recently I think people have been more open to inviting teenagers to speak and giving them spaces to, speak their mind and stuff like that. But before it was very shut off. It was all the older people made the decisions, all the older people, like we could say what we wanted, but like truly everybody knew nobody really cared. Like it was a very hard like balance to find. But I guess like going forward, I hope that they can really focus on education reform, because the biggest part of it is the younger kids, and we don't even notice that yet until they're 20 and have all these racial prejudices that they didn't even realize because they were just taught. And so I think if we were to teach them when they're really young, elementary, middle school, then it'll just fix so many of the problems that happen when people get older and get stuck in their ways and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. So starting young when it comes to education and education reform. When you say reform, what is that? What do you mean by reform here?
I'd say I have a little bit more of a like dramatic approach to it, because I do think that a lot of flawed systems just need to be restarted. But like generally, I'd say just implementing African American culture, like studies, and like just more of the like civil rights era into our like school systems, and just like I feel like the culture in general, because so much of American history is African American history, and it's kind of glossed over. We learn U.S. history almost every year that we have a social studies, so it's really hard to keep learning it and knowing all this stuff, but like seeing that your teachers aren't teaching it. It's just I feel like if we start small, then we should start with like just classes for African American culture, even like Hispanic culture, Native American culture, all that type of stuff. Just it definitely needs to be learned and taught about.
So a wide variety of cultures being taught in
Yes.
schools, starting early age as part of a whole American culture.
Yes.
Is what you're okay. So, I guess when you say starting young. Is there things that are those things are just currently missing right now in education? Is that what's the case?
Yes.
Okay. So with education reform as the goal right now, what else after is you said in police reform? Those are the two main ones. What else are you looking for in Kenosha's culture as a whole as well? Is there anything? What else is you're looking for?
I would say just more like understanding. I think people are afraid to ask like sensitive questions because it is a very tight, nervous kind of energy that happens when you have race talks and all that stuff. So I think if people were to understand not only that some people are just generally ignorant, but you have to be able to, know that you're ignorant in order to fix it. So I think a lot more constructive conversation and a lot more just understanding in general would help so much more. And I think that from the time of Jacob Blake's shooting, I think that people are a lot more open within our community because it happened in our community to talk about it. But there's still the people who would kind of rather stay ignorant than to fully understand.
Okay, so combating that feeling to not only just not talk about it, but to avoid the topic completely. So, if I was going to ask, if you say you were going to ask me about Jacob Blake, it'd be like, oh no, I not want to talk about it. That's kind of the idea you're combating? Okay. So, we talked about, what Equitweens and you did with Jacob Blake, or with George Floyd. I'm going to ask about what, the group did with Jacob Blake, because that was in our community. That was here, and, your group had a protest on Juneteenth, shortly after then Jacob Blake had been shot. So what was the reaction then among your group, among your peers? What was the thought?
Well, among our group, we were pretty much just it was panic. We were all panicked. I was out of town, and we have a group chat where we could talk, and stuff like that. And so I saw the video, but I didn't know, I had skipped over it. It was on a Snapchat story, and I skipped over it. And then I think Heaven, another co-founder, she sent it in the group, and she was like, have you guys seen this? And so we spent almost all of the night, I don't think any of us slept, but we spent all night talking about what we're going to do, or how this is going to affect everything, and what we can do to just help. And so a lot more people were kind of hosting protests. And so we decided to, instead of host one so quickly, we decided to go to them and volunteer more for if they needed help setting up, or we did a lot of food drives, food banks, and block parties. So we did help at the block party that the Blake family hosted. But we really wanted to see how the older people would react. And a lot of people were wondering how the younger people would react. And so it was kind of this weird standstill for a moment. But I talked to one of another activist, I forgot her name, Portia, I believe her name was. And she was kind of just telling me what she had planned and what she wanted to do. And so I kind of clung to her, and we just kind of talked about what we would do, going forward. And she did give me a lot of space to, speak my mind and all that stuff. And so, yeah, it was just a crazy time.
Yeah, it sounds like, you organized before, and this time your actions were, let's join in the community this time and see where we can help them rather than let's host our own thing. So that sounds like what you did essentially.
Yes.
Okay. And so the following days there were protests during the day, and then things were a lot rowdier at night. A lot of the community was hurt by people coming in and such, and in the mornings there was cleanup efforts. What was your reaction at the time to Kenosha both kind of coming together, but then seeing occurrences at night where there would be fires or there would be broken glass? What was the mood around that?
Well, anger is an emotion that it kind of just comes with this. You have to be angry pretty much about all of it in order to go into the street and yell. That's pretty much. So I think like considering like the riots, it was hard to gauge because, you know, a lot of it was people coming in from out of town. But you also have the understanding that people are angry and people want to be heard at all hours of the day. So like there was one part that was like, okay, well, is it like necessary for there to be more noise? But also like this is our town and these people are coming in and they don't even know what they're burning. They burn the like, they're just like making a mess of like, you know, the uptown neighborhood where people, African American people and, you know, Black people are currently living and they like work and stuff like that. So like you could see the divide of like, okay, these people don't even know what they're doing and they're from out of town. And then you could see like people protesting and just wanting change.
Okay. So it's really a divide between the areas, you know, because of course people are angry. It's quite infuriating, but then also the idea is like, wait, this is our this is our city, you know. Okay, and so, you know, after, you know, a few days after because you said there was, you know, what are the youth going to do? What are the adults going to do? Was that resolved? Like, what was the collaboration there? What was that reaction between the groups there?
Well, I don't remember what day it was exactly, but me and Meredith had gone downtown to see like if they needed help cleaning up or painting or something like that, and we ran into a protest that was organized by some adults, and then we talked because like hosting protests and, you know, organizing them, it's very difficult, and it's not that we don't want to do it, because obviously like it's very important and we all are very passionate and we like want to do it, but like there's a lot of like the timing, the expectation and stuff like that. It's very hard to like gauge when you're like organizing them. And so when we had originally planned a protest for Jacob Blake, we were like, okay, well, we're all still teenagers. We need to make sure that it's safe enough to be moving around downtown at such like a late hour. And then the curfew was set in, and so that made it a little bit more difficult. And so when we ran into the adults who organized one of the protests, we asked them like what they were doing, and they were like, yeah, well, we're putting an age limit on our protest. And it wasn't like, it was kind of suggestive because like, you know, if you want to be out past the curfew, you be my guest, like, you know, the consequences, stuff like that. But also, we don't want you guys to feel like you're not involved, because, you know, my parents were gonna come pick me up. Like, I didn't have a car, underage. Like, I didn't have any say in like how, like where I was gonna be and what time. So I was like, okay, that makes sense. So during the day, I think they gave us like, you know, the little, what are they called, megaphones, and they let us, you know, do what we had to do during the day. And then curfew set. My parents came to pick me up, and they kind of took it over from there. And it was, I feel like with us, that's kind of how it was for a lot of the times. Like, we would come during the day, everybody else would stay at night. But of course, that was just based on circumstance.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like there's collaboration.
Yeah.
And kind of acceptance. You know, you're going to be there. There's not going to be avoiding that.
Yeah.
And so you got to speak and, you know, have your voice heard, and you had a megaphone. So that's got to be awesome. Okay. So if there's anything else you'd like to let the Kenosha community know, or Kenosha leadership, or anything else that we've just missed, what would you like to say?
I don't know. I don't think anything. I don't want to. Yeah, I cannot think of anything.
That's okay. Then I'll ask this question as a replacement for you, and just you here. What's ahead for you? Like, what are you looking forward to, just you yourself?
I'm looking forward to just see what happens when I'm like truly an adult. Like, when I have no limits to, you know, what I can do or where I could be and like what I can say. I feel like that is like, I think being young is a very powerful tool, but being young and just barely of age is also really cool, because, you know, it gives me less limits. And I think that I'll be able to just impact more people maybe a little bit faster if I can just do things faster. So.
Yeah, you get to sign papers yourself.
Right?
Like that by itself is enough. So, well, thank you for sitting down and talking with me. It's been great having you with us.
Thank you for having me.